Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm so glad you're with us today. I have a very special guest. His name is Dr. Matt Zakreski, and he is a clinical psychologist. He is a motivational speaker, and his goal in life is to help you break outside of your box to live your best life. And today he's going to talk to us about raising gifted kids. With that, let's get to Dr. Matt.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to be talking about raising gifted kids. So before we get to that, talk to me about what is your background?
Well, it's a easy transition because I grew up as a gifted kid in New Jersey in the 90s. And I always sort of joke that this is my origin story, right?
Yeah.
I was in second grade and the the teacher gave us a math workbook and they told us to go home and do pages 1 through 4 in the math workbook. So I went home and I did pages 1 through 4 and I was like, well, that wasn't hard. So I just did page 5 and 6 and just finished the book. Brought it in the next day and the teacher read me the riot act. She was like, where'd you get these answers? And I'm like, I just did the math. And she's like, but we haven't taught you that yet. And I had that sort of Elle Woods moment, like, what, like it's hard? And so she sent me to the principal's office. And that led ultimately to me getting an IQ test and finding out I'm a gifted kid. And ironically, given the nature of that story, my gifts actually aren't in math science, right? I'm a words person, but math I figured it out pretty early. And so from the very beginning, like I was a person whose different brain ground up against parts of society, right? There was a lot of friction for having a brain like mine, and it's nobody's fault. They didn't like wake up in the morning thinking like, how can we make Matt's life harder? But it's absolutely the true fact. So I said, given that both of my parents were clinical psychologists, I said, if I ever do the work you guys do, I want to work with kids like me. And fast forward 30 some odd years, and here I am.
Yeah. So you have your PhD in psychology? Is that the path you've taken?
But PsyD, but
PsyD.
yeah.
Okay, yes, yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Very good.
Like, why take a cheaper program when you can spend more money? I'm like, oh, God.
Yes, the directions, there was a purpose in it, right? Like you learned something that you needed to know. So let's talk about so we're talking about gifted kids and you mentioned IQ. What does gifted mean? Like when we're saying this, what does a gifted kid mean?
So traditionally speaking, gifted as an IQ score starts at 130, right? So 130 is 2 standard deviations away from the average, which is 100. And you could see that as it starts in the 98th percentile. So if you're a gifted person, if you're a gifted 12-year-old, we could stack every 12-year-old in America up, and I would just tell you to go to the end of the line because you're just going to be the very top. Now, that metric has led to a long-standing tradition in the gifted world about giftedness as elitism. Like you're saying you're better than me, right? But Bryce, if I can ask you a personal question, how tall are you?
I'm 5'10".
Right. So you are an above averagely tall person for a woman, right?
Yeah.
Does that make you better?
No, absolutely not.
I'm 6 foot. I'm a little bit above average for a male. I don't think that makes me any better. I have a good friend from college who's 7'2". And no, he did not play basketball. People always ask him that, right? So he's that 99th percentile height person, but he's like, my life is better in some ways. I can always reach the thing on the top shelf, but it's worse in others. So as an IQ score, right, it starts in that 98th percentile. Now, for many years, we kept that as sort of a hard line. Like you had IQ 129, you're out of luck, chief. Sorry. You're not gifted. Now that we understand more about the brain and how it develops in different ways, those numbers have gotten looser and we're able to see it with more nuance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if we subscribe to Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, academic intelligence is not the only one out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you are somebody who, say, is a gifted dancer or a painter or someone who can solve puzzles really well, if we can measure your aptitude for that in the 90th percentile or higher, then you're considered gifted in that area. And it's a slightly lower there because it's harder to quantify. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you're really, really good at soccer, like what's the 90th percentile? What's the 95th percentile? I mean, like
Sure.
it'd be hard to like parse that out.
Mm-hmm.
So those are sort of the two ways into the club, as it were.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's hard because in our school systems, that's a lot of where parents are hearing about giftedness, right? So it seems like educationally, they're always looking at giving extra, let's say, services to kids who are academically gifted. And maybe, we're missing the opportunity because you might be really gifted in a particular like art or dance or soccer, or maybe you're gifted writer, but it's the IQ score isn't being met that you need to be in that club per se. How do you think, I mean, do you think there is room for our society to grow in that area? I'm curious just about like how we could see more giftedness.
I love that question. And thankfully we've seen that really explode over the last 10, 15 years or so, right? The idea is that as education as a construct gets more nuanced, gets more multifaceted, we're seeing more seats at the table for different kinds of learners.
Mhm.
Right? I don't know, have you ever seen kids do project-based learning?
Yes.
Right? So we're seeing a lot of kids who are gifted in that space who wouldn't necessarily have been in the gifted club 15 years ago, right?
Hmm.
And you're seeing, and the beautiful thing about PBL is that it doesn't require language proficiency, let alone English proficiency. So
Hmm.
you're seeing kids who are like English language learners or kids with speech delays who, we live in a very verbal society, right? We're on a podcast right now, a very
Yes.
verbal medium.
Yes.
And so if kids who are very verbal sort of artificially inflate, we've traditionally missed the kids whose brains work really well in nonverbal intelligence, right? So things like project-based learning, maker spaces, coding, the rise of those things have made more spaces in these programs for kids whose brains were, I mean, they were always gifted. We just weren't seeing them.
Hmm.
Now we're seeing them. Yeah.
right? But it's just this exceptional ability in particular areas that really the goal in my mind, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that gifted kids, the reason why we're providing them more support, kind of, I mean, technically it goes under special education in the public schools, right? Is that they need more in order to have the same amount of success that other kids have. So like for them to learn something, they need more challenge, right? Or they need more instruction in something else so that they're growing in that area. And I love this idea of it being more inclusive because I do think it's been this elite club and it is growing. Like I am seeing it as a therapist with the kids that I see that are in these different groups that are recognizing the giftedness because everybody calls it something different. But I like that the programming is looking at so many different facets. So that's a cool part. What do you think is different about gifted kids? Obviously, we're looking at them being exceptional, but like, what do we need to consider about this population?
I mean, I can't help but respond to the thing you said before, just because I'm sitting over here like freaking out, like, I just what if I could just distill what you said and send that to every school administrator in America, I would be out of a job in 10 years in the best possible way.
Yeah.
And you get it. And that's it's just such a beautiful thing. I wanted to shout that out. Um, because gifted education is special education, right? We have tier one, tier two, tier three interventions just on the other side of the skill development spectrum, right? I work with a kid, he just turned 7, and we did a radical school acceleration for him because he's supposed to be a kindergartner. We put him in 4th grade because that's where his skill set is.
Mm-hmm.
And the administration team is like, well, hold on a second. How is he going to survive? I'm like, we've got a plan. I'm going to take care of the social emotional. We're going to do all these things.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the place to meet him. That's where his needs are. And he crushed it this year. I mean, honor roll, dean's list, all the things, right?
Nice.
And he would have been a mess in kindergarten because other kids would be doing shapes and colors, and he's trying to figure out the hypotenuse of a triangle, right? It is absolutely special education because the idea is the system is built to teach to the middle, right? 68% of people are within one standard deviation of the IQ norm. If you're building a society, that's what you're going to aim towards. That's where the most people are.
Sure.
I would say, like, if you're throwing a dinner party, you're not going to plan the menu over your like friends, roommates, significant other who's vegan, right? You're going to make burgers and then also have a gluten-free bun for a veggie burger, right?
Yeah.
Like, you wouldn't only do veggie burgers.
Sure.
And, right. So that's why I would say it's like, I don't want to take anything else away from any other kid. What they need to learn is what they need to learn. The question of proper education, especially in 2024, is equity, not equality, right? Everybody gets what they need. And that dovetails back around to what you just asked me. We know these kids need different things because they have different brains. So giftedness has a seat at the table for neurodivergence, just like dyslexia does, right? And your kiddo who's brilliant and dyslexic, that's what we call a twice exceptional kid, right? You've got both of those pieces. And we can look at brain scans and see, like, there's where dyslexia is happening. Here are the parts that show up as gifted. Here's what a twice exceptional brain looks like. And that's data we didn't have 30 years ago when I was a kid, right? Because, fun fact, I also have ADHD, right? Didn't figure that out till high school, and it explained a lot. So, I mean, this is really, it's about brain science, which is why when I do talks and podcasts, I always try to start in that brain science area, because this isn't like, oh, some wishy-washy, like, these kids need different things. It's like, no, I can point you to a brain scan and say, here's what I'm talking about. And I feel like that helps a lot of people understand.
Yeah. Well, and I think you bring up a great point of, like, I think if people are familiar with other conditions in the body, it's like ADHD combined with giftedness, combined with autism, combined with dyslexia, learning difference, right? Like, all of those things tend to love to group together, right? It's kind of like they need friends. But the brain is very wired similarly. And so I think, we think certain things, but I love that we have some science behind it. The brain scans, like, I don't know how to read them because that's not where my training is, but I loved, like, when I read an article and it shows the different parts and it's like, this is why we know this. And I'm like, I love that because it's data, right? And it takes the guess out of that. I don't think we're not quite there to using that as our diagnostic way yet, right? But I think eventually we will be, that will be how we're diagnosing things maybe more. But it's so fascinating to me to have this data to show that it's a real thing. Because I do think that sometimes people are like, oh, yeah, sure. But it's like, really, this is a brain difference. And so we need to give space for something that is different to meet them where they're at. So what is the things that we're seeing commonly? And obviously every kid is different and every human is different, right? So like we're speaking in generalities here, but like what do you think parents of gifted kids are experiencing that is like different than maybe a neurotypical kid?
Man. Okay. So let's talk about three things, right? And I tend to think in threes. The first thing is intensity, right? Neurodivergent people, as a rule, are intense, right?
Mhm.
Gifted people, very much so, right? We are intense of thought, intense of feeling, intense of behavior, right? I often say gifted people don't get sad, they get despondent. They don't get happy, they get rapturous, right? Like, I'm using some $10 words here, but that's right. That's that intersection,
Yes.
those big
Yes.
feelings and that big brain,
Uh-huh. Mhm.
woo, right? Um, so we've got that piece. So they are intense. And if you're a parent out there listening to this, and you're like, oh my God, that's my kid. Well, we're about to reveal some other stuff too. So hang in. The second thing is what we call asynchronous development. So a neurotypical kid, um, as the brain develops, there's only so much energy to go around. And in a neurotypical kid, things largely hold together, so everything gets about the same amount of developmental energy, right? To be overly simplistic, all 5 areas of development get 20%. Easy peasy. In neurodivergent brains, that developmental process becomes asynchronous, and the parts of the brain get more and parts of the brain get less. So in gifted people, you see a lot of energy go to the frontoparietal integration area. That's where intelligence lives in the brain. And more energy goes there, which means some energy's got to come from somewhere, right? So what we tend to see is less development in social skills, emotional regulation, and fine motor skills. So you'll have a kid who is 9 years old doing graduate level math, but can't tie their shoes. Like,
Mhm.
it's a very common disconnect we see. And the more neurodivergent a kid is, the more spread we see in that developmental trajectory, right? So if you're quote unquote just gifted, your asynchrony is probably going to largely stick together. But if you're twice exceptional or thrice exceptional, right, the more neurodivergences we add in there, the more we see that spread where you've got a kid who's 9 years old, intellectually 15, academically 14, socially 8, emotionally 7, and physically 6.
Hmm.
And you've got to find a way to intervene with all aspects of that kid, because that's the only way we're going to meet their needs truly, is to see them as all of those different things,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and that makes it hard as a
Oh,
parent
so
because
hard.
you're
Oh
like
my
all
God.
over the place, right? Like you're like, okay, you look little, your brain is, intelligent, you're able to do stuff. So then I'm expecting that you're able to act like X, or like your social skills are like this. And, and it's like all of that part, it gets confusing for us too, because we perceive them, or we even just know their chronological age, right? How old they actually are. And we're saying like, you're 10,
Yeah.
right? You should be able to do X, and that may not be what is working for their brain, right? Like where they are. So what else do we need to take into consideration? You said there's a third part too.
And the third part is that one of the things that's indicated in basically every neurodivergence is weaker executive functioning skills. The prefrontal cortex takes longer to develop. So, have you ever heard of the idea of the absent-minded professor?
Yes.
Right? That's where this comes from, right? Because even if you're just gifted, your prefrontal cortex doesn't fully develop until your late 20s, early 30s. Right. And if you add that in with ADHD, right, and autism, like, you're seeing just they're pushing that developmental thing down the line. So you've got a kid who will absolutely ace the test if they remember they have it. You have a kid who, there's a phenomenon in gifted education called the gifted C, because you've got the kid who's getting A's on all the tests and papers, but failing class participation and homework. So a lot of weighted hundreds plus a lot of low score zeros averages out to about a 74, hence the gifted C.
Yeah.
So, and this, you said the word, like the word should, like you should be able to do this. Well, you have a kid whose brain is not necessarily wired to be able to support them in doing this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are they capable? Absolutely. Are they able? Different thing,
Yeah.
right? And my backpack growing up looked like a bomb went off, right? I mean, like just papers every. It was like when Harry Potter gets into Hogwarts in the movie, right? Just all the letters flying. And my mom would be like, "You said there's a permission slip in there." I was like, "It sure is." Well, I
Let
gotta
me
get
find
it.
it. Yes,
Yeah,
like
right.
5,000.
Right.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah. No, and I was thinking, it's funny that you bring that up because I was thinking, a lot of the kids that I see just with ADHD, right, and neurodiversity, but also especially when they're gifted, like it will be like they never turn anything in,
Yeah,
right? Like, and it's all done.
yeah,
And I can empathize with that as somebody in school back in the day of like, I had all the things done if I remembered that they were due. And also, like, I could do it, but then it's also to execute to get it turned in
yep.
was a whole feat in itself. Yeah.
So that's really what we see. We see the intensity, the asynchrony, and the executive functioning dysregulation. And that's the neurodivergent brain, but it really shows up for our gifted kids.
Yeah. So so knowing this, right? Like, how do we I mean, my thought is like, how do we help them thrive in our world? Because obviously that is going to be hard when there's expectations, but then also just like in our homes, like how do we help them to be their best selves? How do we support that? So can you speak to each of those?
Absolutely. Um, are you comfortable with us using your son as an example?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. So what is your son into?
Definitely Minecraft. That would be
Love.
like number one. Yes,
Number
Minecraft.
one, two, three,
Yes,
7, 10. Yeah.
yes, yes, yeah. We're into he likes art things, but like jewelry kind of stuff. He's building a cat picture with like little jewels that he has. 3D printing, that's high. So it'd probably be Minecraft, 3D printing, jewel art.
Awesome. Love it. So one of the things we know is that kids develop skills more when they're having fun and when it's nested in an area of interest,
Hmm.
right? So traditionally the model here in school, but also, I mean, we're both mental health professionals. I think you see this too, is that we tend to discount people's strengths and interests
Yeah.
and focus on their deficits, right?
Hmm.
And so I tell parents all over the country, I'm like, listen, don't be a deficit detective, search for strengths, right? Because I'm going to have your kiddo develop time management, organization, task initiation, task completion much more easily through the lens of Minecraft than I am on whatever his least favorite subject is. Let's say it's French, right? Because
Hmm.
he already doesn't want to be in French,
Hmm.
right? So his brain is like, I'm fighting this. I don't want to do this,
Hmm.
right? Why would we make it harder for ourselves? So if we lean into what the kids want to do and name the skills they're developing, you're going to see they're going to develop them a lot faster. And that rising tide lifts all the boats.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
there's a family I work with where the kid is, all he wants to do on God's green earth is play soccer. Soccer, 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 soccer. So we said, all right, well, here's what we're going to do. Soccer's going to take care of his physical fitness. We're going to use soccer to teach social skills, but we're going to do soccer to teach organization. So you have to schedule the times you're practicing. Not, I'm just going to go outside and kick a ball, but like, are you going to do it at 9 to noon? Are you going to do it at 1 to 4? When are you going to do
Hmm.
it, bud? And he writes that on the family calendar. We're building that executive functioning muscle,
Hmm. I
right?
love this.
You
Yes,
know,
I love it.
and like, your kiddo is doing something in Minecraft and like say, the Ender Dragon comes and blows up their town, right? Let's freeze that moment. Old school Zach Morris style, right? Right. And your kid's like, I can't believe the Ender Dragon blew up my village. We can be like, how do you feel right now? Use that for emotional awareness. Use that to build resiliency because the
Hmm.
kid already wants to fix it, right? But
Hmm.
if we name the thing they're doing, then they're giving themselves more credit for the thing they do. That's the coolest thing about psychology is, well, let's zoom out even further about mental health treatment, right? Is that our brains are already doing a lot of these things, but if we name them, then our brain goes, oh, that's what I'm doing. And you get extra credit for it. So it's like I probably because I grew up in a house full of psychologists, I've always been a really good active listener. Like
Hmm.
I nod, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And people would point out, like, you're a really good active listener. I'm like, is that what I've been doing? Oh, that's stupendous, right? When I started to get interested in girls in high school, they're like, you're such a good listener. I was like, is there another way to be? It,
Yeah.
I don't want to
Yes.
do it. I just, right? So, so yeah, use their interests as a skill development.
Yeah. So like figuring out, and I think, knowing more about executive functioning and naming the places like internally where your kid could improve, right? To
Mhm.
say like, okay, so we could do better with organization and planning. And then it's like, okay, so if it's Minecraft, it's like talking about how you're going to build your town, right?
Yep.
How are you going to get the resources you need? And to say, like, you're doing such a good job at organizing this. Like, I love how you planned through that and then you were successful. Like, you executed that. How did it go? Did you feel good about it? Is there anything you would change, right? Like, so we're molding this around where they're succeeding and then naming what they're doing well. Like, I love this concept. This is fantastic because I think we don't do that normally as parents, right? Like that is not our go-to. And certainly I was not raised in a home that did that kind of thing, right? Like even though my parents were trying, it wasn't something that they were really amplifying where I was succeeding. And I love this idea with gifted kids to do that even more and taking their interests into consideration. I think this is something that neurotypical kids could also benefit from, but especially when we have a neurodivergence to say like, hey, you're doing this thing really super well. Anything else that you think we can do as parents to really help our kids succeed?
Well, it ties into something you said before, and you named this so beautifully. If there's a singular hack to parenting kids, it's praise the behavior you want to see, right? I cannot tell you how many parents I work with where the kid emerges from their basement cave. And instead of saying, "Oh, it's so great to see you, Sally," they're like, "Oh, look who's still alive." What's Sally gonna do? She's gonna turn around, and go back to the basement, having gotten her, her bubble water. Right now, she's got it. She's like Gollum. I'm like, "My precious," and she goes back out to the cave.
Sure.
So, like, if we praise the behaviors we want to see, we're reinforcing the things that we want our kids to do.
Mhm.
And this ties into the word should you said before, right? I say to parents all the time, if you take nothing else away from listening to me today, replace the word should with could. Could is possibility. Could is flexibility. Could lets us do a lot of different things. Should beat somebody up for something that they didn't do or never happened,
Mhm.
right? You should have known better. Well, they could have known better. Well, got in their way. It moved, the idea here is, we move from furious to curious,
Mhm.
right? As we move from should to could, right? So you shouldn't have snuck out last night. Your kid knows they shouldn't have snuck out. They wouldn't have called it sneaking out, right? Then it's just leaving, you know?
Yeah. Yes.
So you should have snuck out. Okay. Clearly you could have stayed here. You didn't. What got in your way? And like, well, there was a party or a person I wanted to make out with, or I just needed to not be in the house for a little bit, or, right? I'm not saying you have to like the answer, right? But when you throw a should at your kid, you make them immediately defensive.
Yep.
And when the kid gets defensive, they're not going to talk to you. And that makes you madder as a parent that they're not talking to you. So you go full punishment as opposed to natural consequences, damaging your relationship with your kiddo, right? So
Yeah.
it forms, unfortunately, a vicious cycle.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I love this idea. I'm definitely a fan of the collaborative parenting model of working with our kids to solve problems. And because I think then we actually solve the problem. So a lot of times consequences don't get to what we actually want to happen. It's just like it feels better in the moment. Like you're in trouble, you're feeling it, you're upset. But oftentimes I say, I think in my own house when I'm thinking about like, excuse me, if there's something that like is a natural consequence that I can impose on that. Like, or like, a natural consequence can sometimes be just like, well, like you threw your shoes outside and now you won't have any shoes to wear, right? Like, I'm not going to take them probably to the grocery store like that, but I might be like, until you get your shoes, we're not going to leave,
Yep.
right?
And
Like, I'll know you're ready to leave when you have your shoes on.
yep. And that's, like, that's the whole thing is consequences are organic punishment is we're adding something,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I love that example. It's like you threw your shoes outside. Your feet are going to be cold or wet. And we cannot go to a place that requires you to wear shoes until you put shoes on your feet. Now, frankly, I don't care if it's those shoes out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've made a choice. They'll get wet and cold. A dog might eat them, but you've made a choice. You
Mm-hmm.
know, my because then we're not dying on a hill we don't need to, right?
Yep.
We got to go to the store. The most important thing is we go to the store, right?
Yes.
And I don't care if they wear my shoes, right? I mean, they're going to stumble around, but that is a natural consequence that comes with throwing your shoes outside.
Yeah.
The example I often use for parents is if you're driving home after work and you see a state trooper, right? What do? Most people would slow down. And you slow down until the state trooper is passed out of your rearview mirror. And then what do?
Speed back up.
Speed back up,
Yep.
right? So punishment only exists as long as we are able to enforce it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I love doing this with my college kids. Like I'll pick one who's on their phone because let's be honest, they're all on their phones. And I'll go, it's like, I'm going to stand right here in front of you to make sure you're not on your phone. And I do that, and which means I can't see the rest of the room, which means they're all acting up. And then as soon as I turn my back, and like 95% of the time this happens, they just go on their phone and they're like, I don't even want to. I was like, but I told you you couldn't. And then when the threat went away, you immediately could do the thing you could. Right. It's like when Lent ends and I just eat a fistful of chocolate. Right?
Yeah.
Oh, thank God. Oh,
Yes. Yes. You didn't
right?
even want it, but you just
Didn't
like
even
felt
want
like, yeah, it was this forbidden fruit. And I think this is hard because I often hear parents or I see them on different platforms complaining about collaborative parenting or this cooperative parenting or working together with our kids or allowing natural consequences to guide them as not effective parenting, right? It doesn't actually work, and the kids are going to act up. But the thing is, to me, that I think about a lot with punishments especially, is that if I give my kid a punishment, normally they're mad at me,
Yeah.
right? And they're not using this opportunity to make a different choice so that in the future they can lean on that different decision or lean on that different experience. So if I wore dad's shoes to the store and I like literally fell all over the place and had to be in the cart because that was the only place that I wouldn't fall, and I had to have shoes on because that's the rule at the store, then that kind of stinks. Because if I'm 10 and I'm wearing my dad's shoes and falling and in the cart, it's kind of embarrassing. So like
It's
I
humiliating, right? Yeah.
right. So I don't want to do that again. I just want to like get my shoes, and probably the next time I'm not going to actually throw them outside because I don't want to actually have to go get them, because I also learned from that. So I think this ability to learn in these moments is actually so incredible. But I also hear the opposition saying it doesn't actually work. But I can tell you as a parent, it does really work. I
Yeah.
mean, what's your experience with this process? Obviously, it's something that you're telling people about, so you believe in it, but like, does it really work?
It all depends on how we define work.
Yeah.
Right? And I mean, I always, when I say that, I always sound like Bill Clinton from the 90s. Like, what does is mean, right? Like parents want a thing that works, and we'll define work as every time instant change, my kid is now well behaved.
Yeah, no.
And I'm like, y'all, that's not how any of this works. I mean,
Mhm.
one of my favorite questions to ask a parent is, what were you doing when you were this age? Right? And listen, I was a good kid, but I did stuff I wasn't supposed to do,
Sure.
right? I'm
Yeah,
assuming you did similar things, right?
absolutely.
And we're not here to spill our own tea, right? That's the after show.
Yes, yeah.
But I mean, so it's like, hey, a helpful way to think about this is through the lens of what we call the big three, right? Frequency, intensity, and duration. How often something's happening, how intense it is, and how long it lasts. You are never going to get your kid to not melt down. That's not a thing.
Mhm.
But if your kid is going from 5 meltdowns a week to one, well, damn, we're moving in the right direction, right?
Mhm.
And then you can say to a parent, like, yes, I know it sucks that they freaked out at the shoe store. I'm sorry that happened, right? But they used to freak out every time you left the house, and we haven't had this conversation in 3 months.
Mhm.
So there's this temptation to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Like, oh,
Mhm.
it doesn't work. No, it didn't work today.
Mhm. in this one circumstance, because
One
like
instance.
we have so much more to happen or before that event too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we
So
don't,
if we're saying work is just how could we, maybe I could use a different word. Like, do you find that parents have success in being able to develop a more positive relationship with their child and enjoying their child more?
I absolutely think so. And I see it every day in my practice, and I see it with my own children. I mean, when I lose my cool and I come down on them like the hammer of God, right? They're mad at me and I feel worse,
Yeah.
right? I'm not a better parent when I'm upset, right? And it's this, the other day, my daughter, who I told her several times, do not eat your cereal on the carpet. Guess what she did? She ate her cereal on the carpet, and guess what happened? She spilled it. And I was like, take a minute, took a minute. And I'm like, hey, listen, that's bad. We can't have milk in the carpet. What do I need you to do? She's like, I need to clean it. Right. She started doing it. She looked at me with these giant little Disney princess eyes and she's like, can you help me? I'm like, of course I can, sweetie. Because I'm not mad at her. I'm mad at the thing she did.
Mhm.
Right. And it protected our relationship. We solved the problem together. She gave me a big hug and we moved on with our lives. Right. It's There are going to come times where like this is a really important thing and we need to stop everything we're doing to process this properly. Your kid steals the car. Your kid, uses your credit card to buy $300 worth of alcohol, like a really bad thing. Most of the problems we have with our kids are relatively minor,
Yeah.
right? And so then it's like moving through those to make sure that they know that we love them first and there's a teachable moment. Not like, well, because you had, a 2-inch line of Sharpie on the table, which I told you not to do, I've taken all of your art supplies and thrown them in a river, right? Like that's a lot, right?
Mhm.
And it's probably too much. So, I mean, it's the sort of thing, if there's a reality of being a parent and a mental health professional is you got lots of opportunities to get it right. Our
Yeah.
kids are just going to keep having problems. And you got to ask yourself, what's the best use of your time and energy? Being their ally or being their jailer? Right? I know what I'd rather pick.
Yeah. And ally doesn't mean that we're permissive and letting everything go and that we're not parenting. That I think that's a misnomer. Sometimes people would be like, well, I can't be my kid's friend. And it's like, well, that's not what we're asking. We're just saying we're on the same team,
Yeah.
right? Like we're working together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that language, right? I mean, because I think what a lot of parents do is they get stuck in this sort of metronome cycle of like, I'm trying to be nice, I'm trying to help my kid, I'm trying to do the things. I took them the ice cream, I bought them the freaking LOL doll, and they get home and they're like, I don't eat dinner. And you whip from buddy parent to jailer parent, right?
Hmm.
And that's the thing. It's like holding that middle ground, being an ally, right? I tell my kids all the time, like, I'm your dad, I'm not your friend. I
Hmm.
tell my clients, I'm your therapist, I'm not your friend.
Hmm.
That holding that space means there are going to be times I have to give you a verbal kick in the rear end, right? Well, absolutely told one of my clients earlier today, I was like, dude, you screwed up here. You know you did. You don't need me to tell you that. You were supposed to do a thing, you didn't do the thing. He's like, yeah. He's like, aren't you supposed to make me feel better? I'm like, when it's warranted. And after you finish it, I will be very proud of you.
Hmm.
But it's a way to use what we call meta communication, right? Talking about talking to frame these interventions in a way that elevates the discourse around us and our kids.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, harmony is not possible all the time, for sure. I mean, at least it's not in my house. But we can work on getting to a place where we all still really care about each other and are loving each other and working through things together. And we feel like when you succeed, I succeed. And I think that's for me, when my kids, they have a teachable moment and we're solving a problem, working together, and then they use that skill in some other way. I'm like, woohoo, we did it.
Yeah.
Right? Like we can take this circumstance that they learned something from, or they're like teaching their friends, right? Like in the back seat. That's something that makes me laugh. Like, oh well, you know, whatever. And they're like, I learned that this, and it's like, that's so great. Like, I love that they really are understanding that concept, and even so much that they're teaching their friends about it. So yeah, I think, okay, so the next question is, how do we help gifted kids survive or thrive in this world, right? So we were talking about parenting them. What do we do, I guess, as parents or as a social system to support gifted kids?
So if we frame our interventions here through the lens of asynchrony, right? So your kids are not going to be whatever playbook you have for your neurotypical kids, we got to put that on the shelf. We're
Mhm.
doing a different playbook here. So let's go back to the example we used before. You have a 9-year-old, intellectually 16, academically 15, socially 8, emotionally 7, physically 6, right? Your kid is going to need environments that support all aspects of who they are. There's going to be some stuff like that's deep academic and intellectual enrichment. They might be doing a maker space, they might be doing gifted camp in the summer, and they might need to be in a social skills class to develop those skills, right? I have a lot of kids who do like, gamified social emotional learning, like, improv or collaborative gameplay.
Mhm.
So we're meeting them that, but that's a more age appropriate level of intervention, right? I'm not going to put them in a team peer mediation group. They can't swim in that water, right? That's not
Mhm.
fair to them.
Mhm.
And we're going to develop their social interests through their different avenues of development. So you might have a kid who makes friends with the other 10-year-old in their super advanced coding class, right? You may have a kid who really wants nothing more than to have a adult mentor in chemistry, right? One of the kids I work with, they're 17 and their best friend is a 51-year-old retired physics professor. And it's adorable. It's very Harold and Maude, right? But they get coffee, they play chess, and it's the only thing we've ever had to say no to. He's like, "Can I bring them to prom?" I'm like, "You cannot bring them to prom." Sorry, that's we found a line. We're not going to cross that one, right? And it's not even that this 51-year-old person would be inappropriate at prom. It's just there's a rule you can't be older than 21 for obvious reasons,
Mhm.
right? So like that's fine, but they hang out all the time and there's nothing weird about that. Or it's only weird because we're not used to it,
Mhm.
right? So you're going to have to find spaces where your kid fits and set your expectations that those spaces are probably not going to be what your other kids or your nieces and nephews or the kids in the community are doing. I spent my summers going to the Center for Talented Youth Camp, CTY. So, I mean, I love this story. So, it's a 3-week summer camp at a college, and you take a college course, not for grades.
Mhm.
And you live in the dorms, you eat in the caf, you have activities, gifted kids from all over the country, right? And I remember like my mom took me and a couple of my friends out to dinner before I left for camp. And my buddy Steve was like, "Hey man, I made you this nerd protector, man, because those gifted kids, man, they're gonna be weird. They're gonna be nerds and they're gonna try and get their nerdiness on you." And I was like, "Yes, those are concerns that people have." And you got out of the car and walked back to his house, and I was like, fling out the window, right? I was excited, right? And I got there. I'm like, Mom, I don't have to pretend to be dumb here. I can be as smart as I want to be. And like I say this all the time, like CTY saved my life. I mean, it was a place that I could go and be fully myself for 3 weeks every summer. And it put enough gas in my tank that I could survive the rest of the school year. Right.
Wow.
And so whether that's robots club or a special, when you said a special private school, like sometimes you've got to go to where the place is. But the famous line in child development is if the flower's not blooming, we don't blame the flower, we change the greenhouse,
Mhm.
right? You're probably going to have to change the greenhouse for your kid.
Yeah, which can be hard, especially if you have neurotypical kids, and
Yeah.
then you have a kid that has a diversity. That can be hard to shift that mentality and feel like, well, is this fair? But it is fair, right? It is what they need to succeed, right? And so, I mean, I don't like the word fair because I think, it's not really real in life. Like there are things that are unfair, but like what I define it as is like everybody getting what they need to succeed. And I think when you put it in that lens, it's like the one kid needs dance and, math tutoring, and the other kid needs, a college class in the summertime, even though they're 10, right? Like, I think it's that just because it's different doesn't mean that we're not supporting the growth of each human. So,
Absolutely. And, and you might even take that conversation and add an extra piece of it by saying something like, the things we do for you that are for what you need, neurotypical kid, are much more everyday and they're smaller, right? So you get 1,000 things that are worth 1 point. So you get 1,000 points at the end of the year. Your neurodivergent sibling might get 6 things, but each one of them is big, right? Each one of them is worth 200 points, right? So they, yes, they got a little bit more, but it's because there are fewer things that they get more of, right? And it's a really helpful intervention, I think, to just to sort of quantify it a little bit. And
yeah.
just it's like you get something from us every day, whereas your sibling needs these very special things that we have to put extra time and resources into, right? It normalizes out over time, but it's exactly this idea of, right, like equity is exactly what drives best education, best parenting, best mental health, right? It's just all in there.
Mhm. So what do you think can be the biggest hurdles for people that are gifted? And how do we help our kids navigate those things?
So the biggest hurdle in my estimation is you've got a lot of misinformation out there, right? And if people know giftedness, they know it as Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory, right?
Mhm.
If they know giftedness, they think it's elitism. They think you're trying to get your kid into Princeton when they're 9, right? And so, I share all my PowerPoints when I give talks freely because I want parents to have a resource to send to their head of school or homeroom teacher and say, this is what I'm talking about. This is my kid has a different brain, right? It's no different than if they were dyslexic or autistic or if they were colorblind. Right? We would need to make
Mhm.
accommodations based on a different brain.
Absolutely.
And if we can start there with just informing more people, and I'm happy to send that to you, Bryce, to send out to your listeners, because like I
Yes,
said,
that'd be great. Yeah.
right? So let's spread the word, right? And because I don't, it's unfair of us to ask parents to know what we know,
Yeah.
right? And you even said before, like we have the same job, but you're like, there's some stuff that you got in your training that I didn't get in mine, just like
Mhm.
there's stuff you got in your training, Bryce, that I didn't get in mine, right?
Sure.
I would lean on you for those things, like I hope you would lean on me for the other things,
Absolutely.
right? So now you've got this tool to share, and you go, that's awesome. Here's my kid. They read it, they go, oh, that's your kid. And then we start the intervention conversations from a shared platform,
Mhm.
not I've got to convince you to get up here and then convince you to help me.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah. Well, it's overwhelming for most parents, right? Like they don't even know how to step into that, let alone how to convince or even know what their kid really needs. Sometimes it's like, I know that they're really smart and bored at school.
Yeah, right. And I
That
don't
this isn't working.
yeah.
Right. Or they're causing trouble. So like, you're not liking that they're getting up out of their seat all the time, but they're not even listening because they already finished the assignment. So, it's like you're dealing with the negative side effects sometimes. And so I love this idea of being able to help because I do think that this is a problem that I see that people don't understand that being gifted is part of special ed. It literally is part of special ed. That is the law, but I don't know that all schools are following that place and hopefully they are, but I have run into some schools in the past that have not. They said, yeah, we just don't offer gifted.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, that's like a law.
Yeah.
It's like federally mandated, right? Like you can't just not offer that service. But I think as parents, that's the whole point really of this podcast and every single episode that I'm doing is to help parents become the experts so that they can advocate for their kids, so that they can be the best parent for that kid. And so this is fantastic to have this information. So thank you for that. Is there anything else that you think is a big hurdle besides convincing people to understand what giftedness really is and getting past these misconceptions?
I was gonna say something else, but I'm so inspired by what you just said, I'm gonna switch it. Um, we want parents to be empowered. We want parents to be experts, right? And then in every time I have these conversations, I'm sure you hear this all the time too. I don't want to be that parent, giant
Mhm.
air quotes, right?
Yeah.
So I'll tell you this, gang. That parent thing has been absolutely weaponized against us by parents who are fighting for minutia, stuff that shouldn't matter and doesn't matter. I don't like the uniforms for the volleyball team. Who cares? My goodness. Right? Like the volleyball team should have uniforms, great, but like we are talking about people's fundamental rights here. It's a different kettle of corn.
Hmm.
And so parents will be like advocating for their kid to have their IEP followed or advocating for food that their kid can eat in the cafeteria are thrown in the same bucket with you painted the school parking lot a different shade of yellow and I do not like it and I need it fixed immediately. It's my tax dollars at work. And you're just like, is is your life that easy that these are the things you get that upset about? Like, I mean, I try to treat everybody's problems as equal, but my goodness. So this thing, you can advocate for your kid and you may ruffle some feathers in doing so, but you are a long way away from being that parent, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we remember that our kids need us to be their heroes. Do you think Batman worries about, bothering the citizens of Gotham if he's stopping the Joker? Like to an extent, we've got to do what we've got to do.
Mhm. Well, and we have to teach our kids how to advocate. That's not a skill that you just implicitly know how to do. And so I think, teaching them how to advocate for what they need, figure out what it is, advocate for that, and then having people falling through, keep like falling back up. And I think if you are in a place where you're having trouble with that, it's also like finding a therapist for yourself or your kid, right? To be an advocate, because I know that I have been parts of many conversations where administrators may not love me as much because I know what this kid needs. And I do also know that the school is capable of doing this accommodation, and or is legally required to do that accommodation. So sometimes they are not loving me, but I am okay with that, right? So if you need somebody, but there's also IEP advocates out there who can go to these meetings, know what the laws are, know what your kid needs, and can work with your therapist to help advocate for that. So I think be the squeaky wheel, right? Get what your kid needs if it is something that is getting in the way of their learning and them being able to grow the most that they can, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so what do you want parents to take away from this conversation?
The I can distill my whole approach to this to a quote from Maya Angelou. Do as well as you can until you know better, then do better. Right? Wherever you are in this journey, I hope you know now, after listening to us for however long this has been, than you knew when we started, right? So take that knowledge and use it, right?
Yeah.
There is like it is a very human nature thing to beat yourself up for not doing a thing. But if you didn't know that the thing existed or you didn't know how to do it, beating yourself up for that is counterproductive, right? It's like,
Mhm.
how have I never been asked to be the keynote speaker at the Malaysian Gifted Conference? I just learned that existed today, right?
Mhm.
It's that whole should problem, right?
Yeah.
Shame plus could. So now that you know more, you can do better, right? And knowledge is power, and part of that knowledge is tapping in people with those knowledge sets, echoing what you said about having a therapist, having an advocate, having someone to come to those meetings. Because yes, like you, I'm sure I roll up in school parking lots and the administration team is rolling their eyes like, this guy. I'm like, that's right, this guy,
Mhm.
But you've got to protect your relationship with the district as a parent, especially if you have multiple kids in the
Yeah.
district, right? So let people like us do the heavy lifting. That's knowledge. Knowledge is Dr. Matt's going to know more about brain science in this kind of kid than I'm ever going to know, right? He's got a 15-year head start on me. I'm going to tap him in and let him do that for me.
Mhm.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, now that you know more, use it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here today. This has been such a lovely conversation. I so appreciate all of your thoughts. And I know that like as a parent with a gifted kid, I'm definitely like thinking through the things that you have presented on how I can do this better, right? Like knowing more and how to apply it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Matt. That was a fantastic conversation. I don't know about you, but I learned as a parent of a gifted kid a lot today. And that says a lot because I've come to this conversation with a lot of knowledge, but Dr. Matt was great at sharing and pointing out some areas that I can be more conscious as a parent. I am so thankful that you came today and that you were willing to grow your parenting toolbox. Please, if you like what we're doing, will you rate and subscribe to our show? Will you follow us on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube? And also send us episodes of topic requests. We are loving the emails and we are happy to get to the professionals who have the data that you guys want. So please email us at accidentalexperts@gmail.com. Have a fantastic day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.